Amandine is going to give the reminders on the GBS. And then we are going to dive directly into the case study from Vattenfall with two representatives from Vattenfall who are going to share their experience of biodiversity footprinting and the linkages with the science-based target framework. And then we will, again, the team at CDC Biodiversité will guide you through the use of the GBS throughout the science-based target network framework steps. We might have some time at the end for questions and answers, and throughout the presentation, we will also answer the questions directly. And then at the end, we have a conclusion by Sarah Bausmith from the SBTN. We will also share some information and guidance on how to join the corporate engagement program and engage with the SBTN. And to conclude this first introduction, a few words about CDC Biodiversité. So CDC Biodiversité is a company focused on biodiversity and which focuses on long-term restoration and ecological management, training and research, and studies and engineering. So the Global Biodiversity Score was developed in the research and innovation team of CDC Biodiversité. And so I will give the floor to Amandine to present it a bit more, and just maybe a last word. It's CDC Biodiversité, for those of you who don't know it, is a subsidiary of the Caisse des Dépôts group, which is public financial institution. So we have partly a general interest mission. So Amandine, the floor is yours.
So thank you, Joshua. So hello, everyone. I'm Amandine Kemmel, and I'm performing biodiversity footprint assessment for companies at CDC Biodiversité. And so I'm an analyst working on the GBS. So as a reminder, to have more interaction with you and to ask your questions, please use the Menti. So here you can find the QR code or the number coin, so you can join us. And it's not our first webinar, so you may already have followed our January webinar explaining more in details the GBS. So as an introduction, we would like to know if you are already familiar with the Global Biodiversity Score tool. So you can answer on the Menti. So I'll let you some moment to answer. Okay. So 50-50. Okay, it looks like we have 50-50 people having knowledge on the GBS, but the other part doesn't. So here we are just going to have a quick presentation of the GBS. So if you would like to have more information, I invite you to go on our YouTube channel and to watch our previous webinar, which is going really into details of the GBS concepts and presentation. So, but quickly I will introduce the GBS. So the aim of the GBS is to measure the biodiversity impacts and help institutions and companies to identify hotspots and set targets to protect biodiversity. But the main question is how the impacts are measured. So the GBS measure describes biodiversity integrity lost on a given surface. So the unit integrates the MSA on an unimpacted surface, so in square kilometer. The MSA means mean species abundance. So its values ranges from 0% to 100%, with 100% representing an undisturbed ecosystem and 0% an artificialized area. So meaning that 1 square kilometers MSA loss is equivalent to the artificialization of 1 square kilometers of pristine natural ecosystem. So here on the right, you can find an example. So for example, of a conversion of a pristine forest into a plantation. So before the plantation, there was a pristine forest with a MSA of 100%. And with the plantation of 100 kilometers, we have a new MSA of 30%. So this conversion has causes an impact of 70 MSA square kilometers. Yes. And to assess those impacts in MSA square kilometers, actually we translate pressures impact into biodiversity impacts. So the pressures on biodiversity are described by the IPBES, and you can see on the table that the GBS is currently covering 4 out of the main 5 drivers for freshwater and terrestrial biodiversity. And today, invasive alien species and the marine ecosystem are not yet covered. To wrap up, in general, what is the GBS? So I've explained that the GBS gives biodiversity impacts in an aggregated metric, the MSA square kilometers, which is measuring the biodiversity integrity lost on a given surface. And the GBS is also measuring the impacts on the global value chain, the whole value chain, and generated by all economic activities. It's Josefin, I think you have your microphone on. Sorry. So the GBS measures stocks and flows of impacts. So meaning that we consider static impacts, which is the negative cumulated impacts, and the dynamic impacts, which are happening on a periodic period. And the main concept of the GBS is based on a pressure impact model, meaning that thanks to the Global model, we model biodiversity impact thanks to environmental pressures. So it was a brief introduction, and we are now going to go into more details on our today's topic, so the SBTN. So I will soon give the floor to Helle and Josefin that we are welcoming here today with us. And but first, we would like to know a bit more about you, and are you already familiar with the SBTN corporate engagement program, or do you plan to join this program? We would like to know. So you can go back on the Menti and answer the question. So maybe you're not a company, so if you're not concerned about the SBTN corporate engagement program, so you have also a case to tick.
Okay, so we also have in the Menti, you also have the possibility to type in questions if you want, and we're going to answer this question all along the presentation and also during the question and answer time at the end. So for now, we have 2 questions. Okay, someone that cannot see the slides. You will receive all the slides after the presentation, and please like the question that you see, so we will answer the questions with which have more likes. Okay, I think we can switch to Vattenfall's case study. So Helle and Josefin, welcome, and please, the floor is yours.
Hello, do you hear me?
Very well.
Good, sounds good. I will start the introduction, and then I will hand over to Josefin afterwards. My name is Helle Herk-Hansen. I'm heading our environmental function at Vattenfall. Now you can see me a bit better, maybe. And just to let you know, for the ones that doesn't know Vattenfall, that we are a leading European energy company. And for more than 100 years, we have supplied energy to people's homes, as well as worked on electrifying industries. We are 100% owned by the Swedish state. And we work to make fossil-free living possible within one generation. And we drive this through innovation and collaboration. This means that we are transitioning into a more sustainable energy system with growth in renewables, securing infrastructure, as well as providing smart energy solutions to our customers. With climate change at the core of our strategy, we of course have to have ambitious targets as well. So we have defined climate targets in line with science and approved by Science-Based Target Initiative. And our targets for 2030 is in line with the 1.5 trajectory. And we have a net zero target for 2040 as well. I don't know how many had time to, with all that's happening on the news right now, to also see that IPCC released a report yesterday. But that clearly indicates that the interconnection between climate and biodiversity. And in order to reach our climate targets, how we act and deal with biodiversity is equally crucial important. And we, of course, know that very much. So we have also defined a target to become net positive by 2030, or work with a net positive approach by 2030. And in order to deliver on that, we work in 3 areas. The first area is very, very important. We must never forget that it's the concrete measures that we do at site that improves biodiversity that are the most important. So we have a big focus on the concrete initiatives we do. The second step is what we can measure. What we know we can work with, or act upon. So measuring biodiversity is super important, showcasing where our impacts are and how we can attack them, both on corporate level, but we also work with methods both on local and site level. And this is what we will tell you a bit more about today. And the last area that we have a lot of focus on is research and development. We want to make sure that we take decisions based on evidence, based on knowledge, so we actually achieve the benefits and the effects for biodiversity and nature that we are after. And this is an area where we need to spend a lot more focus as well with partners to secure that we have the right foundation. We have a lot more information on our concrete measures and how we work on our website. And you can find more information there. But in order not to take more time from Josefin and the concrete project that we're doing with CDC Biodiversité, I want to hand over to one of our very experienced biodiversity advisors, Josefin.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes, perfectly.
Good. Thank you very much. My name is Josefin Blanck. I work in Helle's team as Strategic Environmental Advisor. I will share a bit of the work we've done so far. You can take the next slide, please. So I will share what we've done on our journey to set science-based targets for nature. So we've assessed our biodiversity footprint using the Global Biodiversity Score. This has been a project that we've run between June until the end of the year, last year, December. And we've done it with the support from CDC Biodiversité and also from Deloitte. And the objective of the assessment that we've done is to, first of all, complete the first step in the SBTN guidance, but also feed into the second end and also the third step in the guidance. So we've done a value chain wide impact assessment. Also, the results have made us look at potential issue areas and identify locations that we can prioritize for target setting. It has also provided us with a baseline definition. You can take the next slide, please. And the parameter of the assessment that we've done is we are using 2020 data. So 2020 is our baseline year. The biodiversity footprint assessment covers all the pressures that are covered in the GBS. It also covered our main activities, so hydropower, wind, onshore, but also partly offshore in the procurement data that we fit into the model. Our heat operations, distribution of electricity, nuclear and sales of gas, and also the main locations where we operate. You can take the next slide. So going into a little bit on the specific steps in the guidance. So starting with the sector level materiality screening in step 1A, we used the SBTN sector materiality tool that is based on the core data, and this has given us a preliminary screening, but we also found that the company level refinement is needed. There's also a limitation in the downstream materiality assessment that is not currently available in the tool. And this tool is very good. It's probably very suitable also for companies that are new in the sustainability assessment. But also for us that we've been doing life cycle assessment for over 20 years, and we have also a lot of location specific environmental data from our operations. So this has also been very helpful in getting the company level refinement to get a more accurate result. But you can take the next step. As part of the assessment, we also mapped value chain impact hotspots, looking at our most strategic suppliers and how we can work with them to reduce impacts. And we've done this by linking our activities to XCO-based industries to provide a qualitative analysis of the strategic suppliers that we have. And the suppliers are ranked according to their corresponding spend connected to each business unit that has been included in the assessment, and also on group level. And the XCO-based industries that are highlighted in orange in the right side of the figure represent the biggest impacts. And this is an illustration with fictive figures, but if we look, for example, to the right, we can see that the XCO-based industry here, named Industry B, is the most impactful industry when it comes to the business unit distribution. And similarly, we can see that linked to this, we have supplier D that represent most of the purchases. So this is how the results are being read and interpreted. And if you take the next, thank you. What we've done with this first two steps, we've done the company level refinement according to step 1C that was in the initial guidance. We, with all financial, spatial, and operational data that has been collected during our process, we processed the data through the GBS tool to get a refined version of the materiality impact table. You can see examples in the slide here. We've done it for both terrestrial and aquatic impacts. And the results in these tables display the share of impacts that are caused by each pressure and per reporting unit. So we cannot use it to, we should not use it to compare different business units, but to see what is material within each business unit to focus and prioritize on. So just as an example, if we look here at the first one, the business unit A, we can see that land use impacts in the supply chain would be the most prioritized impact areas to work further with. And in business area B, we will see the climate impacts due to climate change would be prioritized, both from an operational perspective, but also from a supply chain perspective. And you can take the next one. And another important part of our assessment has been to identify level of influence to assess where we can reduce impacts both in short term and in long term. And we've been able to do this with the GBS tool. And the sphere of control when in own operations, but sphere of influence also in the wider context is very relevant for the targeting on a corporate level. And we've been able to link this both to static and dynamic impacts. And this is just an example of how the results can look from doing that step in the assessment. And this is connected then to the step 2, how to interpret and prioritize. And if you take the next step, we have, based on the results from the company level refinement and also the sphere of influence identification, identified 3 target boundaries, 2 business areas and 1 pressure stood out as our hotspot impacts. And if each of these each business area correspond to a target boundaries, and within each of these boundaries we have recommendations of where to focus in which value chain segments. And the first target boundary area is connected to 1 business area, upstream operations to ensure sustainable biomass sourcing. And the second target boundary is connected to another business unit and connected to enhancing biodiversity through different types of projects in the distribution grid. And the third one is connected to climate change pressure due to our direct operations, so reducing impacts due to climate change. And looking a little bit deeper into these areas, first of all, the results confirm that we are on the right path, taking actions already today. Helle already brought up some of these examples in her introduction. On climate, we already working according to our CO2 roadmap and with our science-based target according to the 1.5 degree. And we also have targets to add more capacity wind and solar and electrify industrial processes in close partnerships. And in the distribution grid, we did a few years ago, as Helle mentioned, a mapping of the regional distribution network where we found and identified 1,600 kilometers of what we call biodiversity hotspots. And from this assessment, we set a target that by the end of 2025, we will have taken measures and implemented management plans in at least 70% identified biodiversity hotspots. And the implementation is ongoing with good progress. We follow it up on an annual basis. And also on the third target boundary with biomass sourcing, we do mostly source residual biomass. So for example, residual products from forestry or like treetops, branches, or pellets made from sawdust, so residuals from the pulp and paper industry. We have mainly certified biomass, and we also do routinely performing spot checks of suppliers. So the next step for us is, of course, to evaluate the current strategies and targets that you see here in the 3 core areas highlighted by our biodiversity footprint assessment. And we will also, in addition to these, assess additional targets for hydropower and wind, connected to wind. And we have set now the first 2020 measurements when it comes to our to Vattenfall's ecological integrity. And this, we need to refine some uncertainties in the 2020 baseline so we can use it and set targets against this SBTN framework. We also, the biodiversity footprint assessment also provided us with different avoidance, reduction, restoration, and regeneration ambitions that we that can help us to set appropriate targets. And this will also be a part of our next step to further analyze this part of the assessment. And that was all that I wanted to say now. So I leave over to you again, Joshua, I think.
Yes, thank you very much, Josefin, and thank you, Helle, for this very interesting case study about Vattenfall's experience. So now we're going to go into more details to see how the GBS connects with the SBTN framework and guidance for biodiversity. So first, you all probably know the SBTN framework is composed by 5 main steps: assess, interpret, prioritize, measure, act, and track. And when you do a biodiversity footprint assessment with the GBS, we try to cover the first step. So answer step 1, feed step 2, and start measuring the baseline for step 3. So in the SBTN guidance, there are 2 possible approaches to assess biodiversity footprint. There's one that is called prescriptive approach using the SBTN tools. So this approach and the SBTN guidance is always under development, but you can already access their sectoral materiality tool presented by Vattenfall, for example, and there are also output templates. And on the other side, the flexible approach is when you use other tools or other models to assess your biodiversity footprint. And so the Global Biodiversity Score, for example, is one possibility to assess biodiversity footprint, and it has a very large coverage in terms of pressures and sectors. It's under continuous improvement also, and we have a growing community around the GBS through our B4B+ club. Also in the guidance, the SBTN encouraged companies to report under 2 indicators, general state of nature indicators and pressure sensitive indicators. And with the GBS, you can see that we can report on both indicators as it expresses impacts in square kilometer MSA. We can report the biodiversity health and more specifically the ecosystem's integrity, but we can also disaggregate the results and therefore have an analysis very focused on specific pressures to report under pressure sensitive indicators. So starting this section with step 1, so we're going into more details of step 1, that is assessing. So having a high-level screening of your impacts and identify issue areas and starting defining the target boundaries. So first step is step 1A about sector level materiality assessment. So in the SBTN guidance, they encourage companies to identify pressures and scopes to assess. So in terms of pressures, the SBTN has listed, you can see on the slide, different kind of pressures. And as you can see, it matches the coverage of the GBS. We're assessing all the pressure except marine biodiversity and invasive species as presented by Amandine earlier. And then in terms of scopes, it's also important to know how is your value chain. It's based on the GHGE protocol. So you can see the SBTN talks about value chain segments. So you have direct operation. Direct operations corresponds to the scope 1 in the GHG protocol, and also in the GBS, we use the scopes concepts. Then you have the upstream segment that corresponds to scope 2 and upstream scope 3. So the upstream part of your value chain, and downstream is for downstream scope 3 mainly. And then when you have identified pressures and scope, you can start by doing this sector level materiality assessment. So as Vattenfall presented earlier, it's a high level screening. So you know what kind of impacts you can expect and on which issue areas you can expect them. Moving to step 1B, it's about the value chain hotspot assessment. So it's going through the value chain of the company and trying to identify where are the hotspots of impacts. So in the SBTN guidance, they rely also on the GHG protocols, so for scopes and for categories to assess in this value chain mapping. And as you can see here, there are some of the categories that are necessary for the SBTN recommendation for the SBTN guidance and framework. And the GBS matches these categories and also has a larger coverage. We're also covering more categories than what is required in the guidance. Then in terms of data, because we will also need data to assess the value chain hotspots assessments. So in the SBTN guidance, there is a requirement about location data. We need to identify places. So for your direct operations and your upstream and downstream value chain segment, it's important to collect country level location data. And in the GBS, we use the same kind of data, and we can also use GIS data if you have it. And to be more accurate in the assessment, we also need to collect operational data. So as you can see on the right part of this slide, the financial data is generally the most available but less accurate data. So we collect turnover and purchases information. But then it's really interesting to collect more operational data to refine the assessment. So we collect products information if you produce or if you purchase transformed products. We collect raw materials information if you use raw materials in your process. Physical flows also, so all the emissions of greenhouse gases, emissions of pollutants, consumptions of water also. And if you have pressure data, it's the best in the GBS, so land use information, wetland conversion, for example. And then we can also use survey, ecological survey data, but it's more complex and more expensive. So generally we don't use it in the GBS. So then the idea of this step 1B is to map the value chain. So as shown by Vattenfall during the case study, we are trying to link the activity of the company through the different business units to exile-based industries and to strategic suppliers. So we can identify in which sector, in which industry you need to, the company needs to work first, and with which suppliers they can take actions towards biodiversity. Then we move to step 1C. So the last step of step 1 is about company level refinement. So so the SBTN is working around the guidance for the steps. This step 1C is currently being worked on and updated, and it's probably going to be under step 1B and 1A, but we rather present it separately in this presentation because we think it's more, it's easier to present it separately and easier to understand. So in the company level refinement, the idea is to use company specific data. So we use what we call user collected data, that is companies measurement and companies reporting information. And if some of the data is not available, we can use externally collected data. That means from other models or databases, and we use proxies to complete the assessment. So all this data is inputted into the GBS to get the full biodiversity footprint assessment of the company. And as you can see, we can relate financial data to our the input-output XIO-based model and to the environmental extensions also. We use all the physical flows, raw materials, and products data into the GBS with internal tools that we have developed. And we can also use pressures data directly and link it to the Global Bio model. And all this combined help us to assess the biodiversity footprint and get impacts results in square kilometer MSA. So also for this company level refinement, the SBTN guidance is encouraging companies to report the contributions to our environmental issues. So you can see here on the left the different metrics and pressures that the SBTN recommends and requires for reporting in terms of environmental contributions. And as you can see on the right, you have all the details data that we use in the GBS, and as you can see, some of them are covering the indicators required by the SBTN. So land use information, pollutants, ecotoxicity, greenhouse gas, and water consumptions. We are collecting this information during a biodiversity footprint assessment with the GBS. So the work is done only once, and you don't have to do it twice. Then just illustrations of outputs that we get with the GBS for the company level refinement. So here it's quite similar to what Vattenfall presented, but you have on the left the other view of the results. So this is an example for aquatic biodiversity, but we also do it on terrestrial biodiversity. So it shows the materiality of impacts for each business unit and each pressure. So we know in terms of dynamic or static impacts, which kind of pressure has a more important impact than another for each business unit. And then on the right, you have the detailed table. So we also in our reports, we also put all the detailed results in tables with results per scope and per pressure. And it is here it is an example for aquatic biodiversity, but we also have it for terrestrial biodiversity. So once all this is done, we can move to step 2. Step 2 is for interpretation and prioritization to identify locations and activities on which the company can start setting targets. So first of all, we need to interpret the results from step 1 and all the data we collected and the results we get in the GBS. So step 2 is an approach that is very location centered. The aim is to identify locations and places where the company can start acting. And in the GBS, what is interesting is that we have a very disaggregated results. So you have a company level results. You can have it per reporting level. We always report terrestrial and aquatic biodiversity separately. And for each of the 2 realms, we also report static and dynamic impacts separately. And if you dive into the results of the GBS, you can have the impacts per scope, you can have the impacts per commodity to know which of your commodities are impacting most. And you can have the impacts per pressure also to know if you're impacting on land use and climate change and encroachment. So it's a very detailed level, and you can really dive in to identify locations and to prioritize your efforts. And so in the guidance, in the SBTN guidance, it's very location centered, as I said, and we wanted to go a little bit further. So we added levels of influence in the GBS. So levels of influence is to identify how the decisions of the company can have an impact on biodiversity, if it's an impact that is very short term, medium or long term. So it helps also in the prioritization target settings. So here you have the definition of the different levels of influence that we use in the GBS, and you have on the right illustrations of outputs, so we can have a graph and we can have also the details in tables. So then moving to step 2, prioritize. So with all this information, we help the company to prioritize where to act first for target setting and impact reduction. So we give some recommendations. So based on step 1 results, we have the sectoral level materiality assessment, we have the value chain wide impact assessment, we have the company level refinement also. With step 2 interpretation, we have the major locations that have been identified at the geographical level. We have also identified major impacts through the value chain, and we have the levels of influence to help us interpret the results. And then we can prioritize, so we can identify business units on which we want to focus first. We can identify issue areas on which the company can act first. Value chain segment associated, if it's more on direct operations or upstream or downstream. And in the report, we always give preliminary recommendations also. So list of actions that can help reduce impacts and will help to set the targets. And so now we're moving to step 3, and I will leave the floor to Joshua on this part.
Yeah, so maybe we can go to Mentimeter to check the questions. So we have answered most of them in the chats, and there are a few left. So please do keep posting questions on the chat. And there was one question maybe for Helle and Josefin at the end. The last one I put on the chat. And so meanwhile, I will be speaking about baseline. So step 3 in this proof of concept of the SBTN guidance, we started exploring step 3, but as you know, the SBTN hasn't yet provided detailed full guidance for step 3. So it's really preliminary work and something we want to share to feed the thoughts of everyone, but it's not yet, it's definitely not yet final. So the objective of step 3 is to, one of the objectives for the baseline part is to define the company's baseline and to disclose them. And the output is a robust and complete baseline of the impacts of the company. At this stage, with the assessment conducted for Vattenfall, we have the pressure for 1 year and the cumulative negative impacts for the year and the periodic gains or losses for the year. And so this is akin to to a baseline for 2020, as it is the year that was assessed. But there are still uncertainties following this first assessment and many areas which still need to be refined. And also we need to have the full guidance of the SBTN to align with it. So this is a kind of a preliminary baseline, which would need to be refined in order to get the full baseline. And then based on that, on the 2020 cumulative negative impacts and periodic gains or periodic losses, Vattenfall or any company using the GBS would be able to set targets for the future. And then do step 4 and do step 5. So we are not talking about step 5 today because it's also very preliminary. But so you know, the team here is working on a verification system, GBS verified, which we plan to pilot this year and to align with the SBTN framework as it is published to be able to do monitoring and verification of the impacts assessed. And so we wanted to take the opportunity to ask you on if you would be interested to conduct a biodiversity footprint assessment with the GBS. So we are going back to the Menti to ask you the question directly. And so if you are interested, please do leave us so that we are able to contact you again after the webinar. I think we are more or less on time. So after asking you maybe go to the next question, Manon. After asking you about the name of your company and if you are interested, we have 5 minutes to take a few questions before giving the floor to Sarah from the SBTN team. And so I don't know, Helle or Josefin, if you wanted to comment on everything that was said and the questions in the Mentimeter, and especially the question about the progress for the future.
Yes, I can comment briefly. But yes, I hopefully, I mean, that's our ambition, that as much of the concrete measures that we do would also be of course reflected in the GBS when updating. But as you say, Osha, there are probably things that there will be things that we do that will not be visual in that sense. For example, with the sourcing of certified biomass, that's it depends, and that's more a part of a strategy, and a part of it. And then I also see that there are probably the types of methodologies that are more site specific that could also be complementary, that could be investigated, but we have not assessed this step in detail, so that will be also included in our next step to come.
Okay. If we look at the other questions we haven't answered yet, so there is one: what was the cost of Vattenfall? So I will let Vattenfall answer that. How often do you have detailed enough info from companies? How often do you have to use proxies? So it depends what you mean by detailed enough, but the slide Manon presented on the environmental information, where there was a linkages with the SBTN. Usually we have data on land use for scope 1, but clearly not for upstream suppliers. Usually we have greenhouse gas emissions for scope 1, 2, and upstream scope 3. We also have water consumption for scope 1, raw material consumption can usually be obtained for the purchases, and then we also have the financial information for the turnover and the purchases. It's more difficult to get the data on, for instance, eutrophication, ecotoxicity, and detailed data on pressures or physical flows for the suppliers. So that's where we need to use proxies, such as the raw material consumption, etc. And what if there is no or very little country data due to long opaque supply chain? How can the GBS be applied? So yeah, that's kind of the same question. If we don't have country level data, then the GBS can definitely be applied because it was built to be applied in such cases. But it's going to be a lot less precise and accurate. And we are going to use proxies such as just the tonnages of wheat or coal or gas. And with if we don't know the country of origin, then just the global average for coal, for instance. So it's going to be less precise, but that can still be applied. And then as better data are gathered, then it can be updated. I think we should probably, so Josefin or Helle, I don't know if you wanted to comment on the cost for Vattenfall, how much time it took on your side, etc. Otherwise, I think we can switch to Sarah maybe.
No, I mean, I couldn't see the question specifically. So if it's just related to this this area, I think, I mean, the cost depends a lot on what type of company you are and where your scope, etc. Maybe turn on my camera here. So I think that if anybody's interested, I think probably you could give a good direction on what a cost could be. Otherwise, I would like to take those answers on the side, because it depends a little bit about the framing and the scope of it.
Yeah, so basically in the link I provided earlier in the webinar, to another webinar, you've got the broad cost of biodiversity footprint assessment, which is for simple data and up to 5 levels of reporting. That's about 40 to 60,000 euros of so it's 40 to 60,000 euros. And when the data are more complex or you have more levels of reporting, like 10 different business units extra, then the cost is higher. Okay, thanks. So we will keep answering the questions on the chat. And Sarah, thanks for joining, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Joshua. If we could go to the next slide. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I wanted to thank CDC Biodiversité and Vattenfall for your wonderful presentations. My name is Sarah Bausmith. I work for the Science-Based Targets Network on the Corporate Engagement Program. And first, I wanted to reiterate at a very high level, the main purpose of science-based targets for nature, which is that they will tell you if you're doing enough of the right actions in the right places to stay within an environmentally safe and socially just operating space. Next slide. And as I'm sure you know, by nature, we mean land, freshwater, oceans, and biodiversity. We're developing methods that will hopefully address these impacts on nature and climate holistically so that the targets will create co-benefits rather than trade-offs. Next slide. So we get the question a lot of what can companies do right now? SBTN will have some form of science-based target setting methods complete by the end of this year, but you don't have to wait to get started. One thing you can do to get started today is work on step 1, which is the value chain and materiality assessment that Vattenfall mentioned that they had worked on. As mentioned previously, we have already guidance and tools available now for this step, and it's a step that all companies will have to complete in order to set a science-based target for nature. But another action you can take right now is to get started on interim targets. Our technical team has issued interim targets on these 5 topics: deforestation, water quality, water withdrawals, GHG emissions, and ecosystem regeneration. They've issued targets where there is enough consensus about the right level of ambition needed. And by setting these interim targets today, you are taking no regrets actions towards setting SBTs for nature. And on the next slide, although the SBTN methods won't be available until the end of 2022, interim targets like this one will provide you with a sense of the direction that we're going, and also some steps that you can take today that will be in line with the methods when they become available. I think for the sake of time, I'm not going to run through this whole slide in detail right now, but these interim targets are available on our website, so I encourage you to check them out after this presentation. But the key points here, if you could go back a slide, are just that we have the action type on the top left. This one is an avoid target. And then we have the target itself, the interim target. We have further guidance for companies that will help them to set the target. And then we have indicators on the far right. Next slide. Another action that you can take right now is to join the SBTN Corporate Engagement Program. In this program, we work with companies like Vattenfall to test drafts of our tools, methods, and guidance in order to ensure that what we're creating is user-friendly and cost-effective for businesses like you. We still have a lot to test over the next year or so, so we highly encourage you to join us. Through this program, we also provide opportunities for members to share how they're approaching our methods and guidance with the rest of the program members so that we can all learn from each other. And just some basic information about this program: it is open to companies, consultancies, industry coalitions, and financial institutions. It will run from now until when we finish our final methods. And then once we finalize our methods, we'll transition from this design phase to an implementation phase where a company can set and validate real targets with us. Next slide. Our corporate engagement program currently has over 130 members, and we're gaining more all the time. On this slide, you can see just some of the companies and consultancies that are involved in this program. And these organizations have joined because they recognize the importance of taking action towards setting science-based targets today, and they see the benefits of working with us to co-create and test our draft methods, tools, and guidance. Next slide. We're also working with a number of industry coalitions and investors through our program. So on the investor front, we're working with the UN Environmental Program Finance Initiative, Principles for Responsible Investment, and the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, or TNFD, and a number of other financial institutions to ensure alignment with our methods and their reporting and disclosure platforms. I also wanted to mention that we're now officially a core knowledge partner of TNFD, which means we'll be feeding directly into their work. And then on the last slide, we just have the minimum requirements for joining the corporate engagement program, but you can just sign up on the SBTN website. And then once you do so, we will help you through the rest of the registration process. I wanted to note that you're not committing to setting a science-based target for nature by joining our program. But we would love for you to join and help us test our methods, tools, and guidance. So please feel free to reach out. And with that, I want to thank you all for your time and attention today. And thank you to CDC Biodiversité for hosting this webinar.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. And thank you all for this very interesting interventions.